Dr. Sarah Chen stood at her kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching the morning sunlight filter through the cherry blossoms in her backyard. The peaceful Sunday morning shattered as her phone buzzed with urgent notifications. She glanced at the screen, expecting another university emergency, but instead saw dozens of messages about unidentified objects in Earth's orbit. The silver ships appeared without warning, their massive forms reflecting sunlight like mirrors in the sky. They hung motionless above every major city on Earth, their design unlike anything human engineers had ever conceived. The vessel's surfaces rippled like liquid metal, yet maintained perfect geometric patterns that seemed to defy physics. Sarah watched the news coverage with growing fascination as the first transmission arrived. The message, broadcast simultaneously in every human language, came from an entity calling itself the Galactic Conquerors. "We have observed your species for some time," the artificial voice announced. "You stand at a crossroads. Prove your worth to join the galactic community, or remain isolated until you achieve faster-than-light travel independently." The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session within hours. Sarah received an unexpected call from her former colleague, Dr. James Martinez, now a senior advisor to the UN Secretary-General. "Sarah, we need your expertise," he said, his voice tense. "The Council is assembling a response team, and your name came up in discussions." "My name?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "James, I study isolated human cultures." "What does that have to do with alien diplomacy?" "That's exactly why we need you," James replied. "You've spent your career building bridges between cultures that seem impossibly different. Right now, every nation is preparing to send their top military commanders and political leaders. But maybe that's not what we need." Sarah arrived at the UN headquarters in New York the next morning. The building buzzed with frantic energy as representatives from every nation debated their response. Military leaders proposed displaying Earth's defensive capabilities. Politicians suggested elaborate ceremonies and formal diplomatic procedures. Economic advisors recommended showcasing Earth's technological achievements. Standing before the Security Council, Sarah offered a different perspective. "The Conquerors clearly has technology far beyond ours," she began. "They don't need to be impressed by our weapons or our scientific achievements. What if we show them something uniquely human instead? Our ability to understand and connect with those different from ourselves." The council chamber erupted in murmurs of disagreement. A senior military advisor stood up. "Dr. Chen, with all due respect, we're dealing with advanced alien species. They'll expect to meet with our highest authorities, not anthropologists." Sarah smiled. "When I first contacted the isolated Sentinelese people, they had rejected or attacked every previous attempt at communication. The key wasn't showing strength or authority. It was demonstrating understanding and respect for their perspective. Perhaps these aliens, despite their advancement, need to see that humans can bridge divides that technology cannot." To everyone's surprise, the Secretary General nodded slowly. "Dr. Chen's approach is unconventional, but perhaps that's exactly what we need. The Conquerors must have seen countless species attempt to impress them with military might or technological achievements. Let's show them something different." 3 days later, Sarah led a diverse team of cultural experts, linguists, and conflict resolution specialists to the designated meeting point in Geneva. The Conquerors representatives emerged from their ship, tall, crystalline beings with 4 arms and multiple sets of eyes that shifted color like opals. As the aliens approached, Sarah noticed subtle variations in their crystal formations, possibly indicating rank or social status. She gestured to her team to observe these details. The lead alien's eyes flickered with an unexpected pattern when it noticed them studying its features. Surprise, perhaps. "Welcome to Earth," Sarah said warmly, making sure her body language conveyed openness and respect. "We look forward to learning about each other." The crystalline beings exchanged glances, their colors shifting rapidly. Earth's approach was clearly not what they had expected, and Sarah knew their real work was just beginning. The transport vessel carrying Sarah and her team emerged from the quantum tunnel into a vista that took their breath away. The Star Palace hung in space like a diamond snowflake, its crystalline structures extending in geometric patterns that seemed to defy traditional architecture. Streams of vessels from various species flowed through its translucent corridors, creating an ever-shifting dance of light and shadow. "Remember," Sarah addressed her team as they approached the docking bay, "every gesture we make will be analyzed. But don't let that make you rigid. Our natural ability to adapt and connect is our greatest asset." She watched as Dr. Maya Patel, their xenolinguist, practiced breathing exercises to calm her excitement, while Dr. Marcus Wong, their cultural systems analyst, could barely contain his wonder at the sight. Their Concordat escort, whom they had come to call Crystal Song for the harmonious resonance of their movements, guided them through the arrival protocols. The team emerged into a grand atrium where representatives of dozens of species conducted their daily business. Towering Vaxcar moved with surprising grace despite their massive scaled forms, their bodies shifting colors like living auroras. The ethereal myriad seemed to phase between solid and light, their movements creating trails of luminescence in the air. Sarah noticed something peculiar as they observed the interactions around them. Despite the incredible diversity of life forms, every conversation followed strict patterns. Species maintained precise distances from each other, exchanged specific gestures in exact sequences, and communicated through what appeared to be heavily formatted protocols. During their first official meeting, a Vaxcar representative named Symphony of Dawn was explaining trade regulations when Sarah noticed their scales ripple in a pattern that contradicted their formal words. "Pardon my observation," she interrupted carefully, "but does the current trade agreement cause you concern?" The chamber fell silent. Symphony of Dawn's scales frosted over, a reaction Sarah instantly recognized as surprise. "How did you detect my emotional state?" they asked. "Our biological indicators are considered too subtle for non-Vaxcar to interpret. Humans have evolved to recognize patterns in body language, even in species very different from our own," Sarah explained. "It's not technology we use, but rather an innate ability to empathize and understand." The revelation caused a stir among the assembled representatives. A myriad diplomat, their form shimmering with curious light patterns, approached the human delegation. "We have noticed your species lacks the standard neural interfaces for diplomatic protocol management. How do you maintain diplomatic accuracy without AI assistance?" Maya stepped forward, her voice gentle but confident. "We believe that sometimes the most important diplomatic messages aren't found in words at all, but in the spaces between them." As their first day in the Star Palace drew to a close, Sarah's team gathered in their assigned quarters to discuss their observations. The rooms adapted to their biological needs, creating an Earth-like atmosphere that felt surprisingly homey despite the alien architecture. "Did you notice the tension between the Vaxcar and Myriad delegations?" Marcus asked, pulling up his notes. "Their formal interactions are perfect, but their subtle cues suggest deep-seated conflicts." Sarah nodded, watching the artificial sunset through their chamber's crystal walls. The Concordat's rigid diplomatic protocols might actually be preventing real understanding between species. They're so focused on perfect communication that they're missing the nuances of genuine connection. A soft chime interrupted their discussion, a message from the Concordat's diplomatic council. Their unusual observations had not gone unnoticed, and they were being invited to attend a high-level session the following day. The message contained thousands of pages of proper protocols and procedures. Sarah smiled as she sent a simple response. "We would be honored to attend. Perhaps we could begin with sharing a meal together." It was a deliberately informal suggestion, and she could almost imagine the confusion it would cause among the protocol officers. As she prepared for sleep in this strange and beautiful place, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if humanity's greatest diplomatic asset might be precisely what the Concordat initially saw as their greatest weakness: their wonderfully inefficient, beautifully complicated way of connecting with others. Sarah stood at the observation deck of the Star Palace's diplomatic wing, watching the swirling colors of a nearby nebula. The past week had been filled with meetings, cultural exchanges, and careful observations. Today, however, something felt different. The usual rhythmic movements of various species through the crystalline corridors had become stilted, formal beyond even Concordat standards. Dr. Chen, Maya's voice carried urgency as she approached. The Vaxcar delegation just requested an emergency session of the Trade Council. Their scales were shifting to deep purple. I've never seen that color pattern before. Sarah turned from the view, her attention immediately focused. Deep purple, you say? And the myriad representatives. Their light patterns have been pulsing at irregular intervals all morning, Marcus added, joining them with his data tablet. The AI translators are reporting normal diplomatic exchanges, but something's definitely wrong. The emergency session convened in the Grand Chamber, a spectacular room where the ceiling mimicked the galaxy's spiral arms. Sarah and her team took their designated position, notably distant from both the Vaxcar and Myriad delegations. Symphony of Dawn, their scales now a deep, roiling purple, stood to address the Council. The Myriad expansion into the Cerulean sector violates 17 established protocols, they announced, their translator conveying the words in perfect diplomatic language. But Sarah noticed their secondary arms twitching, a sign of extreme agitation that the other species seemed to miss. The Myriad representative, Lightweaver, rose in response. Their form rippled with rapid bursts of blue and silver. We operate within all established parameters for scientific research stations. The Vaxcar accusations are unfounded. Sarah leaned forward, studying the subtle interactions. The Myriad's light patterns showed a distinctive flutter at their edges. Fear, perhaps, or anticipation. The Vaxcar's scales continued darkening, and micro-movements in their stance suggested they were preparing for confrontation. The Concordat's AI mediators projected holographic charts showing trade routes, territorial boundaries, and resource distributions. Everything appeared to follow established protocols, yet the tension in the chamber continued to rise. If I may, Sarah stood, drawing surprised looks from various species. While the data suggests compliance with all protocols, I notice both delegations showing signs of significant distress. Perhaps we could discuss the underlying concerns rather than focusing solely on the technical aspects. A ripple of confusion passed through the chamber. The Concordat's head mediator, a tall crystalline being, tilted their faceted head. The protocols exist to prevent emotional interference in diplomatic proceedings. All metrics indicate proper adherence to established guidelines. Yet the Vaxcar's scale patterns suggest deep-rooted fear, Sarah continued, and the Myriad's light frequencies mirror patterns we've observed during discussions of historical conflicts. Are we perhaps missing crucial context by focusing only on current data? Symphony of Dawn's scales flickered with surprise. How can you perceive? They paused, then their voice changed, becoming less formal. The Cerulean sector was the site of our last great war. Our people remember the burning of 1,000 worlds. And our research stations seek to heal those worlds. Lightweaver's form dimmed slightly. But we understand why our presence might trigger difficult memories. The chamber erupted in murmurs as the two representatives broke from standard protocol to share historical context. The Concordat mediators seemed at a loss as centuries of carefully maintained diplomatic distance began to crack. Sarah exchanged glances with her team. They had just witnessed something unprecedented. Two species breaking through formal barriers to express genuine concerns. The true challenge would be helping them build on this moment of authenticity without triggering a diplomatic crisis. As the session adjourned in confusion, Sarah received an urgent summons from the Concordat's inner council. Whether they viewed this disruption of protocols as a breakthrough or a disaster remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. Human-style diplomacy had just shaken the foundations of galactic politics. The inner council chamber of the Concordat felt different from the other rooms in the Star Palace. Instead of sweeping crystalline architecture, this space was intimate, its walls lined with shifting patterns that seemed to record the history of 1,000 worlds. Sarah stood before the assembled council members, their varied forms creating an impressive display of galactic diversity. Dr. Chen, the head counselor's crystalline form shimmed with deep blues. Your intervention in today's session violated 300 years of established diplomatic protocols. This is unprecedented. Sarah took a careful breath before responding. With respect, council members, sometimes unprecedented situations require unprecedented approaches. I have a proposal, if you're willing to hear it. The council members exchanged glances, their various biological indicators showing a mix of curiosity and concern. The head counselor gestured for her to continue. Let me transform the neutral conference space into what we on Earth call a garden of understanding, Sarah explained, activating a holographic display of her design. A place where species can interact without the weight of formal protocols. Where sharing food, adapted for each biology, becomes a bridge between cultures. Sharing sustenance. As a diplomatic tool, a myriad council members' form flickered with confusion. Our species don't even process nutrients in the same way. Sarah smiled. Exactly. The point isn't the food itself, but the shared experience. On Earth, we've found that informal settings often lead to breakthroughs that formal negotiations cannot achieve. To her surprise, Symphony of Dawn spoke up from their observer position. The human spoke truth about our fears regarding the cerulean sector. Perhaps there is wisdom in their primitive methods. The council deliberated for what felt like hours, their communications happening in frequencies and forms Sarah could only partially perceive. Finally, the head counselor spoke. You have one planetary rotation to prove the value of your approach. After that, we return to established protocols. Working through the night cycle, Sarah's team transformed the designated space. Maya coordinated with environmental engineers to create distinct atmospheric zones that would accommodate different species' needs. Marcus researched traditional sharing rituals from various cultures, adapting them for alien physiologies. The next day, representatives from both the Vaxcar and Myriad delegations entered a space unlike anything they'd seen in the Star Palace. Soft light filtered through living plants from a dozen worlds. Comfortable resting spaces accommodated different body types and gravitational preferences. Most importantly, at the center stood a circular area with specialized environmental fields. Welcome to the garden, Sarah greeted them warmly. Today, we share not just space, but experiences. The Vaxcar can absorb their crystallized starlight here, while the Myriad can commune with their nutrient mists. Different sustenance, shared moment. Initial awkwardness gave way to curiosity as the delegations explored the space. Symphony of Dawn scales shifted to softer hues as they watched a myriad light pattern dance through their nutrient mist. Your patterns, they observed, they remind me of the stellar nurseries in the cerulean sector before the war. Lightweaver's form stabilized into a more solid state, a sign of focused attention. We study those nurseries now, seeking to understand how they birth new stars. Your people's historical records of the sector have been invaluable to our research. Sarah watched as the two representatives began sharing stories about the stars they both cherish, their usual formal postures relaxing. Other species representatives, initially there to observe, found themselves drawn into the informal exchanges. In one rotation, the garden had accomplished what months of formal negotiations could not. It had reminded everyone that beneath their protocols and differences, they all shared a fundamental wonder at the universe they inhabited. As the session ended, the head counselor approached Sarah. Perhaps, they said quietly, we have been so focused on preventing diplomatic mistakes that we forgot how to make diplomatic progress. Sarah nodded, knowing this was just the beginning. The real challenge would be helping these ancient species remember how to trust not just protocols, but each other. The success of the Garden of Understanding led Sarah to an even bolder proposal. Standing in her quarters, she gazed at the holographic model of the Star Palace's grand ceremonial hall, while Maya and Marcus added final touches to their presentation. A galactic cultural festival, Sarah explained to the assembled council the next morning. Not just diplomatic exchanges, but a true celebration of what makes each species unique. Art, music, stories, the pieces of ourselves that exist beyond political boundaries. The head counselor's crystalline surface caught the light in a way that suggested thoughtful consideration. The garden experiment exceeded expectations, but this would involve thousands of representatives from dozens of species. Exactly, Sarah smiled. Imagine the Vaxcar sharing their stellar harmonies while the myriad create their like sculptures. Every species bringing something uniquely their own to share with others. The preparation took 3 full cycles of the Star Palace's artificial day. The ceremonial hall transformed into a space of wonder, with designated areas for each species to showcase their cultural heritage. Sarah's team worked tirelessly, helping coordinate environmental requirements and translation protocols that could handle artistic and cultural concepts. The festival began with the Vaxcar performance. Symphony of Dawn stood at the center of their delegation, their scales shifting in complex patterns that created harmonic resonances in the chamber's crystal architecture. The music they produced wasn't just sound, it was color and vibration and memory, telling the story of their people's journey through the stars. The myriad followed, their combined light forms creating living sculptures in the air. Lightweaver led the performance, their people's essence coalescing into shapes that depicted ancient stellar migrations and the birth of new worlds. When they portrayed the devastation of the Cerulean sector wars, many observers noted how the Vaxcar's scales shifted to colors of mourning and remembrance. Their grief patterns match, Maya whispered to Sarah. Different species, same emotional resonance. Throughout the day, more species shared their cultural treasures. The crystalline Concordat members demonstrated thought-sharing dances that made the air shimmer with shared consciousness. The gaseous Zephyr Collective created wind symphonies that carried the sense of 1,000 worlds. The human delegation offered something unexpected: storytelling. Dr. Marcus Wong stood before the gathered species and began telling ancient Earth tales of bridging differences and finding common ground. As he spoke, Sarah noticed how various species' biological indicators showed emotional responses that transcended their physiological differences. During a quiet moment between performances, Sarah found Symphony of Dawn and Lightweaver speaking quietly in a corner of the hall. Their usual formal distance was gone, replaced by the closer proximity of beings sharing confidences. The myriad light sculptures, Symphony of Dawn was saying, their scales shimmering with gentle colors, they show the same stellar nurseries our ancestors sang about. We thought those harmonies were lost in the war. Lightweaver's form pulsed softly. Perhaps we could combine our arts. Vaxcar harmonies guiding myriad light through the stories of stars we both cherish. Sarah watched as other species began forming similar connections. The Concordat's rigid protocols gave way to genuine curiosity as ancient species discovered new ways to understand each other through art and expression. The head counselor approached Sarah as the festival entered its final hours. We designed our protocols to prevent misunderstandings, they admitted. We never considered that understanding might require more than perfect translation and regulated interaction. Sarah nodded, watching as a group of young delegates from various species attempted to combine their different art forms into something entirely new. Sometimes the deepest understanding comes not from avoiding our differences, but from celebrating them. In that moment, as art and music and light filled the Star Palace, the boundaries between species seemed to fade. They weren't just diplomatic entities anymore. They were storytellers, artists, and dreamers, each with something unique to share with the universe. The success of the cultural festival resonated through the Star Palace in unexpected ways. Sarah noticed subtle changes in the daily operations. Species began greeting each other with cultural gestures learned during performances, and the rigid formation of diplomatic gatherings softened into more natural arrangements. Dr. Chen, the head counselor's voice carried a new warmth as they entered her team's working space. The Inner Council requests your assistance in something unprecedented. We wish to redesign our diplomatic protocols. Sarah looked up from her data display, where she had been reviewing recordings of various species interactions. Redesign the protocols. The same protocols that have maintained peace for 3 centuries. The same protocols that may have also prevented deeper understanding. The counselor's crystalline form shifted with hints of blue and gold. Colors Sarah had learned indicated optimism. Your methods have shown us that there might be a better way. The task was monumental. Sarah and her team spent days in the palace's vast archives, studying the evolution of Concordat diplomatic procedures. Maya discovered that the original protocols had been designed during a time of intense conflict, prioritizing prevention of war over promotion of peace. Look at this, Marcus called out during their research. He projected a historical recording showing the first contact between the Vaxcar and myriad species. The AI mediators translated everything perfectly, but they completely missed the body language that might have prevented centuries of misunderstanding. Sarah presented their initial findings to a joint session of species representatives. The chamber had been rearranged following the Garden of Understanding design, allowing for more natural interaction while maintaining comfortable environmental zones for each species. The current protocols excel at preventing diplomatic incidents, Sarah explained, but they may actually hinder genuine connection. We propose a hybrid approach, keeping the precision of AI translation while incorporating awareness of nonverbal communication and cultural context. Symphony of Dawn, their scales now regularly displaying calmer colors, raised a question. How can we maintain diplomatic accuracy while adding such imprecise elements? By recognizing that precision and understanding aren't always the same thing, Sarah replied. When you shared your stellar harmonies during the festival, did any translation matrix capture the full meaning of your art? The chamber filled with murmurs of agreement. Lightweaver's form brightened. Our research stations in the cerulean sector have made more progress in understanding stellar phenomena since we began informal exchanges with the Vaxcar than in the previous 50 cycles of formal data sharing. Working with representatives from each species, Sarah's team developed new diplomatic frameworks. They created spaces for both formal negotiations and cultural exchange within the same diplomatic sessions. AI translators were upgraded to include cultural context and nonverbal cue recognition, taught by representatives of each species. The most surprising development came from the younger delegates. A group of junior representatives from various species formed what they called the Harmony Collective, dedicated to learning and teaching cross-species communication methods. Watch, Maya whispered to Sarah during a Harmony Collective session. A young Vaxcar was teaching a myriad delegate how to interpret scale patterns, while nearby, a Concordat crystal being learned the light language of myriad emotional expression. The head counselor joined Sarah at the observation window. When your species first arrived, we thought your lack of neural interfaces and AI diplomatic aids was a primitive trait. Now we understand it was that very primitiveness that allowed you to see what our advanced systems missed. Sarah smiled, watching the future of galactic diplomacy taking shape before her. Sometimes the most sophisticated solution is simply remembering how to connect with each other as living beings. The Star Palace itself seemed to reflect the change, its crystal corridors now alive with the harmonious blend of formal protocol and genuine connection that humanity had helped create. The Star Palace's main observation deck offered a perfect view of the cerulean sector, its swirling nebula and stellar nurseries painting the cosmos in shades of blue and silver. Sarah stood with her team, watching as a joint Vaxcar myriad scientific vessel emerged from quantum space. First contact was just 3 months ago, Maya mused, making notes on her datapad. Did you ever imagine we'd see something like this so soon? Sarah smiled, remembering the tension that had filled these halls just weeks before. The foundation was always there. They just needed a new way to build bridges. The experimental vessel, named Harmony of Light, in both Vaxcar song speech and Myriad light language, represented the first joint venture between the two species in over 5 centuries. Its design combined Vaxcar crystalline technology with Myriad light-based navigation systems, creating something entirely new. Symphony of Dawn approached the observation deck, their scales shifting in patterns that Sarah now recognized as excitement. The initial surveys exceed expectations, they announced. The Myriad's understanding of stellar phenomena, combined with our crystal tech scanning arrays, has revealed aspects of star formation we never noticed independently. Lightweaver materialized beside them, their form stable but glowing with pride. And the Vaxcar's harmonic resonance technology has allowed us to detect subtle energy patterns we previously missed. Together, we're understanding the stars in entirely new ways. The success of the joint scientific mission had sparked a cascade of collaborative projects. Sarah watched as delegates from various species gathered in what had once been formal meeting rooms, now transformed into collaborative spaces that accommodated multiple environmental needs. Dr. Chen, the head counselor's voice carried across the deck. The inner council requests your presence for an important announcement. In the council chamber, Sarah found representatives from every major species assembled. The room's architecture had been modified to incorporate elements of the Garden of Understanding, creating an atmosphere that balanced formality with comfort. The joint mission to the cerulean sector has proven more successful than our most optimistic projections, the head counselor began. But more importantly, it has shown us a new path forward. Today, we announced the formation of the Interstellar Cooperation Initiative. The announcement triggered a wave of color changes, light patterns, and harmonic responses from the assembled species. Sarah felt Maya grip her arm in excitement as the council explained further. This initiative will establish joint research stations, cultural exchange centers, and diplomatic training facilities throughout Concordat space. The council continued. Each facility will incorporate human diplomatic methods alongside our traditional protocols. Lightweaver moved to the center of the chamber, their form creating intricate patterns in the air. The Myriad propose our first joint station be established in the heart of the cerulean sector, not as a research facility alone, but as a symbol of how understanding can transform former battlegrounds into places of creation. Symphony of Dawn scales rippled with approval. The Vaxcar support this proposal. Our stellar harmonies and your light sculptures will tell new stories among the stars we once fought over. Sarah watched as other species began offering their own contributions to the initiative. The Zephyr Collective proposed atmospheric research projects. The crystalline beings of the Concordat offered to adapt their quantum communication networks to incorporate emotional and cultural context. Your species has given us something remarkable, the head counselor told Sarah quietly. We thought we had achieved peace through perfect protocol. You showed us how to achieve harmony through understanding. As the chamber filled with the mixed sounds of various species planning their joint futures, Sarah reflected on how far they had come. The Star Palace was no longer just a place of careful negotiation. It had become a true center of galactic cooperation. The view of the cerulean sector seemed brighter somehow, its stars bearing witness to the birth of a new era in galactic relations. In the end, humanity's greatest contribution to the cosmos wasn't technology or military might, but the simple, powerful art of bringing people together. 1 year after humanity's first contact with the galactic Concordat, the Star Palace gleamed with a different light. Sarah stood in the newly constructed Hall of Harmony, watching as students from 24 species practiced cross-cultural communication techniques. The space combined elements from every member species: Vaxcar crystalline architecture, myriad light sculptures, and even plants from Earth's diplomatic gardens. Professor Chen, a young Vaxcar delegate, approached, their scales shimmering with the gentle colors of respectful greeting that Sarah had helped codify in the new diplomatic handbook. Could you review my observation notes on Zephyr emotional states? I'm still learning to interpret their atmospheric variations." Sarah smiled, remembering her own early days of learning alien body language. "Of course, second melody of spring. Remember, with the Zephyr, it's not just the density changes. It's the rhythm of their fluctuations that carries meaning." The Institute of Cultural Understanding had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a human innovation had evolved into a true galactic collaboration. Each species now contributed their unique insights into cross-cultural communication, creating a dynamic and ever-evolving approach to diplomacy. Maya entered the hall, accompanied by Lightweaver and Symphony of Dawn. The once adversarial representatives had become the Institute's strongest advocates, their own friendship serving as a powerful testament to the effectiveness of human diplomatic methods. The latest results from the Cerulean sector are remarkable. Lightweaver's form pulsed with excitement. The joint research stations have mapped stellar nurseries that were hidden from both our species for millennia. We've already identified 3 new sustainable energy sources. Symphony of Dawn scales rippled with harmonious patterns, and our cultural exchange programs have led to a new art form. We're calling it Star Song Light Sculpture. It combines Vaxcar harmonics with myriad light manipulation. The first public performance is scheduled for next month. The head counselor materialized in the hall, their crystalline form now permanently modified to display more emotional indicators, a change that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "Dr. Chen, the final preparations for the Earth induction ceremony are complete. Would you review them with us?" Sarah followed the counselor to their office, now designed with comfortable spaces for multiple species to gather informally. The holographic displays showed the planned ceremony that would officially welcome Earth into the Concordat, not as a junior member, but as a full partner with special recognition for their diplomatic contributions. "We've incorporated elements from human diplomatic traditions," the counselor explained. "The signing ceremony will include what you call a shared meal, with dishes adapted for each species' biology. The Harmony Collective will perform a multi-species cultural presentation." Sarah studied the plans, noting how seamlessly human and alien traditions had been woven together. "It's perfect. A true celebration of unity and diversity." Later that evening, Sarah returned to the observation deck, the same spot where she had first witnessed the vastness of galactic society. Marcus joined her, carrying data from their latest diplomatic training sessions. "Did you see today's class?" he asked. A Concordat crystal being taught a Zephyr how to interpret myriad light patterns, while a Vaxcar helped translate. A year ago, that would have been impossible. Sarah nodded, watching the distant stars. "We came here thinking we needed to prove humanity's worth to the galaxy. Instead, we helped the galaxy remember something it had forgotten. That true strength lies not in perfect protocols or advanced technology, but in the ability to bridge differences with understanding and empathy." The Star Palace hummed with the harmony of 1,000 species learning to truly know each other. In the Cerulean sector, stars danced with new light as former enemies worked together to unlock the universe's mysteries. And on Earth, a new generation of diplomats prepared to join their galactic colleagues in building bridges across the cosmos. Humanity had found its place among the stars not by conquering or competing, but by helping to create something greater than any single species could achieve alone. A true community of galactic civilizations, united in their wonderful diversity.